Kevin Gordon here for Autosavant, coming to you from the 2013 Jaguar XJL Supercharged, the long wheelbase big boy of the Jags. And before I get into the car, what it is, and everything else, the one thing that I think is the most important after spending a week with the Jaguar is the fact that there's something about it that feels analog. It's kind of hard to express, but there's something about it that you still feel connected to the car, where a lot of these big ultra luxury sedans these days are starting to feel more and more digitized and less connected. With that, press the starter button. Of course, you get your pop-up gear selector like you do in all the modern Jaguars these days. And one important note right from the start, and that's the fact that the last time I turned off this car, I had it in full angry mode. So with the Jaguars these days, you get the ability to turn on race mode, or dynamic mode, which turns all the gauges red. And then on top of that, when you shift into drive, you can also choose to put it in sport drive. The final step to the equation, if you really want to be a lunatic, is to turn off traction control. So one short press gets you what they call track DSC. What that means is you're not going to get much tail out antics, but it does allow for some wheel spin in a straight line. If you actually turn it back on and then do a really, really long hold, as I sort of ramble along here, it'll eventually turn off all of the nannies, or at least it'll tell you that it's going to turn off all the nannies. Let's see, here we go, DSC off. You get a little warning beep, everything else. The only thing I would say about that is it still does put some governors in place to keep you from killing yourself, because with this thing being as long as it is and with the power that it has, it will happily play with the rear end. And I do believe that if you were overly enthusiastic, especially in anything damp, you would quickly find the back end coming around on you, and unless you were highly skilled, you'd probably have a hard time catching it. So with that, and so that I don't film myself destroying $100,000 in Jaguar, I will leave it in track DSC for the rest of our time together. So as we get underway, let's talk a little bit about the base XJL Supercharged and then the options that this one has. Because actually, I think this is one of the most interesting of the big Jaguar options, and there's quite a lot of them at this point. So, as I mentioned, it's the XJL, which means long wheelbase, Supercharged, which means you get the 5-liter V8 engine under the hood or bonnet, depending on what you'd like to say, being that this is an English car owned by an Indian company at this point. On top of that, this car has the Sport and Speed Pack, which is a really interesting set of options. For $7,800, you get 20-inch wheels, red painted brake calipers, a speed limiter that's increased from 155 to 174, which is completely useless in the United States unless you really, really disvalue your license. And I think the nicest thing it does is it blacks out some of the chrome that you find on a standard Jaguar these days, even some of the lesser models. So the grille, for example, isn't a full bright chrome mesh. It's blacked out. You get a little lip spoiler in the front, or a splitter, and you get a tail spoiler in the back. And then you also get the upgraded interiors. You get 18-way power seats that are heated and cooled for both driver and passenger. And you also get, so jumping around a little bit here, one of the most interesting design aspects of the Jaguars these days, at least the big one, is this big sweeping swale that they've put all the way across their cars. It's a beautiful thing and really well integrated here. It actually sort of campers opposite of what you'd expect it to. And in this one, it's all a big piece of carbon fiber, which is really pretty. You'd think Jaguar and wood, but they do seem like they're getting away quite well with making it a big piece of carbon fiber instead. So that brings you from the $92,000 base price just up to about $100,000. This one also has the illumination package, which means that the air vents have little lit up rings around them. The kick panels have illuminated sills, and the trunk also has an illuminated sill as we get onto the highway here. The final thing this car has is adaptive cruise control, which of course maintains a following distance between cars. The one thing that this one will not do is come to a complete stop and then pull away again at a certain low speed. It's like 25 miles an hour. It bings and turns off and you're completely on your own. The only other thing the adaptive cruise does is does give you forward collision warning. So if you're coming up on something quickly, it bongs and starts to tension the brakes ahead of time. Let's talk about that 5-liter supercharged V8. In this instance, it makes 470 horsepower and 424 foot-pounds of torque. And let me tell you, it motivates the car along quite nicely. And in this one, with the new 8-speed transmission that it has, and that's definitely lose your license type speeds right there, you notice that I left my foot in it in sport mode and it doesn't shift unless you tell it to. So if you manually select your gear in sport mode, it will sit there and bounce against the rev limiter. It isn't doing anything on its own without your input, which is nice. It's one of those things that does make you feel like you're a little bit in control. You notice I said 8-speed transmission, and that's a newer thing for this car. When it came out, it started with a 6-speed. They've upgraded it to one of the ZF units that's an 8-speed, and let me tell you, it's actually a really, really nice transmission. I honestly thought it was still the 6-speed before I looked it up, and that's because it doesn't seem to hunt for gears. It's not like you find it randomly searching or overly dropping gears. It always seems to be in about the right place. In full-out dynamic and sport mode, shifts are aggressive. You can feel them as it jumps between the gears. But if you put it in normal drive mode, it sort of wafts you along, but it's never caught out. It seems like it has the ability to drop down multiple gears. If it's all the way up in 8th gear, and you stomp on it, it's going to drop down multiple at a time to get you back to an appropriate sort of level of acceleration. Other fun options you get in the XJL Supercharged with the Sport and Speed Pack is, of course, cooled and heated seats in the front. They're also cooled, heated in the rears. You get the upgraded Meriden 825-watt, 15-channel, 20-speaker stereo, which is a really, really nice stereo. I'm actually going to do a separate technology run-through on this car. Given that the nav in the Jaguars has been given a little bit of trouble, we'll walk through that and let you make some of your own opinions. Of course, I'll be providing some of my own. Other updates to this car, on top of at least the base XJ, include, of course, leather absolutely everywhere. The steering wheel's wrapped in beautiful leather. The dash is wrapped in beautiful leather. The seats are in upgraded leather compared to the lesser of the big Jags. In the Sport and Speed Pack, you get a suede wrapped headliner and side pillars. Really, it's gorgeous and feels quite nice. Fundamentally, almost anything you touch is real metal, real leather, or real carbon fiber in this one. Let me turn on radar guided cruise and we will talk a little bit about the engine in this car. So radar guided cruise is pretty standard in the way it works. Turn it on, crank the speed up to higher than you're actually going, most likely. And then there's a secondary set of buttons down here you press to set up your following distance. This is the shortest one to give you an idea to that beautiful Accord Cross Tour that we're following right now. I want to talk a little bit more about that engine, that 5-liter Jaguar V8 that's supercharged in this instance. A couple things that I've noticed about this one. One is, for it being 470 horsepower and 424 foot-pounds of torque, it feels like it's got way more torque. It's one of those engines that, because it's supercharged, you really do feel like it's doing a lot, basically right off idle. And sure, the detriment to supercharged engines is they're a parasitic power adder, but this one really is a very, very sweet unit. Now, I would say it had more torque because it just feels so meaty in the middle of the rev range, but still has a bit of throw to the top of, as you move the tach higher, there's definitely some more throw there, and that 424 foot-pounds of torque runs from, I believe, 2,022 to 5,500 RPM. So it's, of course, a big gob of it pretty much through the entire effective rev range of the car. The other thing that I note that's different about this engine compared to the other times that I've experienced it in the XK or even in the XF is it's sounding better than it used to. The blower on this car and the intake noise really used to sound a little, I don't know, vacuum cleanery. Like it didn't sound harmonious and satisfying. Well, in this one, you know, for it being a big 4-passenger, long wheelbase luxury car, they've really sort of hit a very nice balance of sound. This thing manages to sound aggressive when your foot's in it and just whispers along at highway speeds when you're not really using it extensively. And that sound seems to be a pretty good balance of intake noise. You do get a little bit of sound from the supercharger, which to me is actually a plus. You also do seem to get a decent exhaust track. So it's a nice balanced setup from an engine noise perspective. And again, I think it's worth noting that for this car being rated at 470 horsepower, it's of course available also in 510 horsepower in the Super Sport and 550 horsepower in the XJR editions. You wouldn't really want for more. It's a car that will just happily spin its rear tires from a stop pretty much any time you want it to. And, you know, I haven't seen hardcore performance numbers for this car, at least in the 13 iteration with the 8-speed transmission. I do know it was a sub 5-second 0 to 60 car back in the day, and some people were at like 4.5 seconds with this engine combination with the 6-speed transmission. So this one with the 8-speed, I think, would only help that because the transmission really is quite intelligent, and it isn't like first gear is so short and the shift is going to add much time to it. All right, you notice that we have a bit of an outfit change, so a little bit of a jumping around here, and that's because yesterday I lost one of the cameras part of the way through the recording, so jumping in. But coming to you day 2 here of a review, and, you know, talking about the Jaguar and how it drives and everything else, but I figured I'd give you guys a chance to get a full speed, you know, on-ramp acceleration run, let you hear the car go through gears on its own. The important thing to note about the way the Jag drives is that it doesn't necessarily have the highest handling limits of all the cars out there. It's just the fact that it gives you a lot of feedback about what's going on, and as a result, sort of lent itself to being a very pleasant thing to drive aggressively from time to time. Is everything perfect with it? No, I mean, the coupe-like profile of the big Jag, you know, Jaguar isn't one of these companies that is currently making a, you know, 4-door coupe version of all their cars. So as a result, they've sort of split the difference between having big squared-off greenhouses on all their cars and then having a secondary model that gets you a coupe profile. So the big Jag really is very coupe-like when you look at it from the outside. And as a result, the headroom isn't enormous in here. You know, I have the seat as low as it'll go, and you'll see I've got, you know, 1.5 inches of headroom. In the back seats, there's quite a bit of headroom in the long wheelbase, but you do end up sitting reasonably low in the car as a result. It's not like a theater-style seating in the back there. You really are pretty low in the car. But those back seats are a really pleasant place to be. You get your own set of climate control back there on both sides. You get heated and cooled seats and really quite a bit of legroom. Because this is the Sport and Speed model, you don't get the rear trays the way you would in some of the other long wheelbase Jaguars, and rear entertainment is an available option that's not on this car. Other things that wind up being a little less than stellar, again, I think lending themselves to the shape and sort of profile of the cars. The trunk isn't the largest you're going to find in this class, but still, it's not a small place back there. It's just some of the other cars in this class are cavernous in the trunk. And of course, The infotainment system, which we'll talk about in a little more detail, is nowhere near class leading at this point. You know, the screen's a little low on res, a little slow to respond, and their sort of information architecture, the human user interface portion of the way they've arranged everything is a little strange. Like, for example, if you go into the seat heating functions or cooling functions and you press the home button, the sort of menu button to get back to the home screen, you find that it doesn't do anything. You've actually got to go press the soft touch button on the screen to get back to the home menu. But with all of that, the XJL Supercharged, especially with the Sport and Speed Pack, winds up being a really very nice driving car. The engine's got a huge amount of muscle and works everywhere. The new upgraded transmission works pretty much flawlessly. It really is a very dynamic thing to drive and a very enjoyable drive. And the final thing I would say about it is, with that Sport and Speed Pack and the blacked out nature of this one, especially being in triple black, it really is one of the prettiest, stealthiest. You know, it's not ostentatious, but still, you know that there's something going on. It's aggressive looking without being sort of blingy in any sort of detracting ways. It is just a beautiful car inside and out. With that, Kevin Gordon from Autosavant.com. Look forward to talking to you guys soon.